Welcome into episode 314 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. The Bruins and Panthers are locked at one game apiece after game 2 of their Eastern Conference. Is it even called the Eastern Conference semifinals anymore with these new alignments? I think it is, right?
I don't know. I just call it the second round.
Yeah, the second round works. So the teams traded victories. Bruins win 5-1 in game 1. Panthers return the favor, winning 6-1 in game 2. I think clearly, guys, if you go back and watch the highlights of the third period, the last couple of goals for Florida, their 5th goal, their 6th goal, the Bruins weren't even focused on playing defense. They were trying to look for hits and whatnot. So it's a little bit of an inflated score, but certainly from the last 40 minutes of play before the circus started, it was all Florida. And there's a lot to get into in this game, good and bad, despite losing 6-1. So I'll throw it to you guys for the opening shifts.
Well, certainly one of, plenty to break down as far as the game goes and how it got out of hand. But obviously one of the big highlights, takeaways from this game that everyone's going to be talking about is David Pastrnak dropping the gloves with Matthew Tkachuk, which occurred after there had already been over 100 penalty minutes accumulated just in the third period alone. And really all of that in about a 3-minute stretch. Got to a point where just every whistle was a full line scrum, 10-minute misconducts being handed out like candy. And then, that fight essentially put an end to like all the extracurriculars. Like that was like the last hurrah where everyone's like, all right, okay, let's just finish this game out now. I would describe myself as more of a logical person than an emotional one.
Disagreed.
So my first reaction when I see Pastrnak drop the gloves is, that's not very smart. Like, he's clearly outmatched. Tkachuk has way more fighting experience. I don't need Pastrnak risking getting hurt. But then there is also that emotional hockey fan part of me that was like, hell yeah, way to go, Pasta. Like, that rocks. And I think there's going to be a lot more people in that Bruins dressing room who are the latter, who see Pastrnak do that and are like, all right, like our most talented players stepping up like that. And I think that's going to get them pretty fired up for game 3. So, that doesn't look like he got hurt. Obviously, that would be the one concern. But, just, by the way, really a rarity to see two superstars like that fight. I saw someone tweet out that it might have been, in terms of cap hit, the most expensive fight in NHL history. 2 players making over $11 million, or Tkachuk, I think, is a little under. But, yeah, just crazy way to end a game that turned pretty crazy in that third period.
That's right, Connor McDavid. You're next. Come on, get up there. Drop the gloves. Obviously, it's no surprise Tkachuk fought. The big surprise is Pasta, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. I don't think there's a single guy in the Bruins locker room that thinks that was stupid. So anyway, we will get more into that because, like you mentioned, it was just one of many, many fights and craziness that went on in a game that kind of felt more like what we expected. Game 1 didn't really feel like what I expected from the series. This really felt more like last year and more like what everybody thought it could be. But one thing that I don't think we expected in game 2 was Swayman to kind of get hung out to dry. And as a result, he gets pulled from the game about, I don't even think it was 2 full minutes into the third period. Ullmark comes in. Montgomery talked after the game about how he thought he might just start Ullmark for the third period because he didn't think that, he kept saying this, he didn't think the Bruins had juice. And that had to do with fatigue from not having any time off in between series when Florida did. And so there's a bunch of failed clears that end up coming right back at Swayman. And so eventually the decision was made by Montgomery, not because of anything Swayman did, he said, to take him out of the game, put Ullmark in and try to send a message. But I guess that really leads to, a topic that we'll get into, which is who starts game 3, because there hadn't been a lot of controversy for over the last several games because Swayman had been playing so well. I still thought he played well, but we can just talk about what it means for Ullmark to see his first time since round 1, game 2.
Yeah, both of your takes to start this are definitely topics worth getting into later on as we go. And so I guess I'll save my thoughts for then. My opening shift is that game 2 was a story, certainly until the circus started in the third period, which, Scott, I'm 100% with you. I love it, especially if you're gonna lose. Like, try to claw back something out of a loss, right? So like they went down swinging, they went down fighting, and if you lose 6-1, you don't gain anything from it. You lose 6-1, and you go down the way that they did, battling physically the way that they did. It sets the tone for the rest of the series. And we watch playoff hockey. We watch sports for moments, right? Only one team wins a championship every single year in every single league. Like, only one fan base gets to watch that. Obviously, you want to see your team win a championship ultimately, but you want moments along the way. And last night, despite a 6-1 loss, there was no shortage of moments in the third period. So my opening shift, though, was before all that kind of unfolded. It was a game of self-inflicted wounds, I felt like, for the Bruins. They made mistakes that in parts of a hockey game that you can't do it. So really, even the first Florida goal, the Bruins have possession. The puck goes up the wall. It gets kept in, and Forbert is in the far corner because he was expecting Swayman to go to him. But there was way too much time for him to adjust to the fact that the puck went the other side to get to the front of the net and pick up Lorenz's stick, and he didn't do that. So self-inflicted wound. And that first goal was also in the first couple of minutes of the second period. But where the Bruins really killed themselves and this game got away from them was Brad Marchand has a puck on his stick in a defensive zone, about 10 seconds left in the game, in the period, after a face-off in a D zone, and he just goes off the boards, easy keeping for the defenseman. And next thing you know, it's in the back of the Bruins net. So you give up a goal in the last, not only a minute, but the last seconds of a period. And then you give up a goal in the first minute of the third period. You can't give up goals in those moments of games. And the goal in the third period, a minute in, I have to go back and look at it, but it was careless puck play by the Bruins, and they were slow getting back. So the game was 3-1 at that point and was not over, but it was after that goal. And as we talked about, the fifth goal and the sixth goal were products of the Bruins really looking for hits as opposed to playing defense, and then everything ensued after that. So the game got away from the Bruins well before the extracurricular, and it was self-inflicted wounds and the lack of puck management.
Yeah. And by the way, are we going to name names and like who was really egregiously making those like self-inflicted wounds? Because there was a few guys that stood out, like more so than others. Obviously, you talk about the Marchand field clear, but Charlie McAvoy did that a bunch of times. Charlie McAvoy fans on a clear, loses his stick. I don't think it was broken, doesn't pick it back up. He's lost in coverage, goal comes the other way. Like, and I texted you guys last night, like, what do you think of McAvoy? Because he just didn't look at himself. And I don't know if he's just really tired. He's playing so many minutes. Like, it's the second round. They didn't get a lot of rest. I don't know if the fatigue causes him to have some mental lapses and just he's fanning on stuff throughout the whole playoffs, not just yesterday. So it's very curious to me because I texted you guys this too. I don't know if I remember a time in his career where he went this many games where we're just watching him like whiff on passes and turn pucks over and fail on clears and just thinking to ourselves, when's he going to snap out of it? Because I don't remember him having a stretch like this before.
Well, and he screens Swayman on Forsling's goal, the 3-1 goal at the end of the second period there that, Brian mentioned Marchand with the failed clear. The Bruins finally win a key defensive zone faceoff, and they still screw it up. But yeah, McAvoy's battling with Tkachuk. Tkachuk basically spins away when he sees Forsling, tee up a slapper, and McAvoy can't get out of the way, can't get the block, and Swayman, I don't think ever saw that shot. So, another issue there. Like, if you go back to the Toronto series where, again, he essentially screens this goalie and doesn't get a block, it deflects in off him. So, like, that's another issue. Swayman getting pulled, obviously wasn't really about the way he was playing. And stopping shots wise, I think he was still solid. I don't think there was much he could have done about any of the goals, but communication was off. And, these are always tough because you don't know the percentage blame that goes to Swayman or goes to a defenseman. But Brian mentioned that goal where Forbert's expecting it to go behind the net to him, and instead Swayman goes to Wotherspoon, who is under more pressure. If Swayman reverses that to Forbert has all the time in the world to get his head up, figure out what he wants to do to start the breakout. He gets it to Wotherspoon, who has two guys closing on him. All Wotherspoon can do is throw it up the boards to no one, turnover, and next thing you know, there's a goal. So I don't, did Swayman not hear Forbert? Did he make a poor decision? Did he not communicate? Did Forbert not yell loud enough? We don't really know, but ultimately there was a miscommunication. And then the fourth goal, puck gets chipped into the zone. Should have been icing. Bruins clearly expected it to be. But it was waved off early enough that Swayman and Carlo should have been able to adjust and communicate and figure it out. And instead, they just about bump into each other. Swayman leaves the puck in a tough spot for Carlo. He gets knocked over by Barkov on the forecheck, and the puck's in the back of the net 2 seconds later. So, that is also part of the job for a goalie is communication with your defenseman. And that was definitely off last night. Not enough for me to say oh, Swayman needs to sit a game. No, I would still go back to him in game 3. I'll just say that now. But, I don't let him off the hook for that.
Yeah, let's give our answers for that now while we're on the topic. I also say keep with Swayman. Mm-hmm. Because from what Montgomery said, I think Swayman might have been the only one that wasn't playing like he was fatigued. And I don't think I noticed that in his game, but maybe that's where mental lapses come from too. So you could argue for Ullmark to go in if those were mental mistakes because of playing so much. Then you could convince me that either one was a good option just because they're both good goalies, and Ullmark has 3 wins against Florida this season. But at the same time, I don't think he kills Swayman's flow. I think he still has confidence. I think even him speaking after the game, it was already like water under the bridge. And I don't think that he has any bad feelings about being pulled and understands, it wasn't about him. So if it were me, I'd stick with Swayman, just keep him rolling, just let him bounce back because he's got that kind of personality where things like that motivate him. So I don't see a reason to take him out unless they're noticing him with fatigue affecting his game. So
I too would go back to Swayman, and I think there's a few things that hint to that as well. Number one, he made some very key saves, especially early on. He had another point blank save within the first couple of minutes that could have been a 1-0 lead for Florida. Obviously, the Bruins end up losing the game, but they do get the Bruins do get the 1-0 lead, and the Bruins had a couple of missed opportunities when they had the 1-0 lead where they could have added to that. And it all would have been because of Swayman being sharp early. And he was sharp throughout. Scott mentioning the miscommunication moments is absolutely true. And that's on, is that Forbert being out of the lineup for a while, being rusty with the communication? Is it Forbert and Wotherspoon not playing a ton together because of Forbert's injury? Is it more on Swayman? It doesn't really matter. I think ultimately the team was off. They were off tonight. And also Florida was on. They had to be. And I knew going into that game last night that they were going to be, you were going to see Florida's pretty close to their A game. And I think he did for the most part. But as far as Swayman being in game 3, I think Montgomery pulling him was a sign that he's going to go back to him in game 3 because he didn't want him to be playing meaningless minutes in a game that was already out of hand.
And he could have fought Tkachuk. Who knows who he fights, because he would have.
He could have fought Tkachuk, but I think it was strategic by Montgomery to take him out of the game that was out of hand, not play unnecessary minutes, and also get Ullmark a touch. And I also don't think you're throwing Ullmark to the Lions to get lit up if you're gonna yeah, right. Thank you. Lions Den is what I meant, but you're not throwing him to the Panthers den to get lit up if you're going to go back to him in game 3. And then Montgomery also had that conversation with Swayman on the bench before he went down the tunnel, basically saying, this is not on you. Your team let you down tonight. So I'll let you guys respond to that. I also want to get back to the McAvoy stuff, but I'll throw it back to you guys quickly.
Yeah, the other benefit, I guess if you want to call it that too, pulling Swayman is it gets Ullmark his first action in 2 weeks, right. Which, if you are at all debating the decision for game 3 or maybe even looking ahead to game 4, if, God forbid Swayman has another slightly off game, like now Ullmark isn't as rusty as he would be. And, he gives up 2 goals as well, by the way, when he comes in. And I thought he did make a couple good saves too, but the game's so gone at that point. I didn't really think either goal was soft or anything. But just to get him action, like there's also at least a little bit of a positive in that too.
Yeah, I agree. I if you want to get back to McAvoy, Brian, because that was another thing that was just glaring. I don't know. I had it in my notes as something that I really wanted to discuss because I just don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody does, Bridget, because it's not the Charlie McAvoy that anybody's accustomed to seeing. And you talked about how is he tired from round 1? I mean, this play dates back to round 1. And, it really dates back to from the moment the Bruins went up 3-1 against Toronto. So from game 5 versus Toronto through game 2 of the Florida series, McAvoy's a -5. So, this has been going on for quite a bit here. I talked about it after the podcast where the Bruins beat Toronto in game 7. They kind of won that game in that series at the end, kind of in spite of McAvoy. I know he's playing top pairing minutes, playing against top players, but Matthews is out a couple of those games, so his assignment was easier, and he had some egregious turnovers. And while going -5, he's also turned the puck over countless times for grade A scoring chances that Florida and Toronto have not scored on. And when he has the puck in the offensive zone, it's dying on his stick. There was a play last night against the Panthers where I believe it was a power play opportunity. The puck squeaked out to him in the top of the right circle. He had all time and space to put a shot on net. He defers and he goes to DeBrusk on the left circle, and DeBrusk is coming in kind of off angles. It's not the best shooting lane. And I'm telling you guys, it's nothing that we don't all know. It's definitely it's a lack of confidence right now. People can sit there and speculate if he's hurt or not. Unfortunately, even if he is hurt, so is everybody else in the playoffs right now. And Brad Marchand has put his stamp on these playoffs so far in the Toronto series. David Pastrnak has now put his stamp on the playoffs so far with the Game 7 overtime victory, game-winning goal, and his fight last night with Matthew Tkachuk. Charlie McAvoy, as the other Bruins' best player, and Jeremy Swayman has put his stamp on this playoff run the entire time, all 60 minutes of almost every game he's played. Charlie McAvoy is the only one that hasn't had any moments of stardom and putting the team on his back. And I'll be honest with you guys, based off what I'm seeing, I don't see him just switching a flip in game 3. This seems to be something that's just going to be tough for him to get out of, and I don't know how he's going to do it.
Yeah, I do think some of it's mental, and that, like, I guess if you're looking for reasons for optimism, it's like it might just take one really good play, an involvement on a big goal or something to kind of snap out of that. But yeah, like I don't really think it's injury. I mean, does injury cause him to whiff on that puck up the boards before, what was that, the Panthers' second goal, I think? And then he gets hammered by Okposo, but like he only gets hammered because he whiffed on the initial pass and the puck's still there. So yeah, it is hard to figure out. Like I feel like we've said it all, but like it just seems like a mental confidence thing to me as much as anything.
I still don't know why he left the stick on the ice in that play either, because I don't think it was broken. It just kind of looked like it fell out of his hand. So he just didn't pick it back up. And then he's the guy in coverage on Barkov. And if obviously you can't lift his stick if you don't have a stick. So he couldn't do much in defending him there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming I'm just guessing that like maybe he felt like he would have had to chase himself too far out of the play to get it, or already saw Barkov turning towards the net. But yeah, I mean, the thing is like not only can he not lift Barkov's stick, but Barkov also beat him to inside position. Like,
Yeah.
McAvoy still has a chance to body him up, kind of box him out at least. And maybe Barkov still makes a play anyways, but definitely didn't help that like Barkov got inside him, and then also McAvoy didn't have a stick.
He's totally off. Sorry, Bridget.
Yeah, I was gonna say I also think his shot selection has been off, because like he'll be shooting from the point and it doesn't make it past the first guy closing him out.
It's everything about his game is off right now. Everything, his situational awareness, his decision making, his transition game is lackluster. I mean, he's like, even last night, the Bruins go into the second intermission down 3-1, having just given up a backbreaker goal, which Scott mentioned he was screening Swayman on, and obviously he was part of the what was it? The second was the second goal? What was the second goal again? The second goal. The Barkov goal. Yeah. So in the second period alone, he breaks the stick, right? So there's the Barkov goal where he breaks the stick and he's just, falling over Swayman after the goal goes in. And then he screens Swayman on the third goal after the Martian giveaway. Then the third period starts, guys. Before the Bruins even give up that first goal in the third period, the puck goes to him just beneath the Bruins blue line in the D zone. So it's kind of like a neutral zone transition a little bit. And he softly gives the puck to nobody. And one of the Finnish players for the Panthers, I kind of get them confused sometimes, just steps right in and gets a quick shot off. Before the icing, before the fourth goal for Florida, it's like, dude, this is 20 seconds into the period. And so not only are you whiffing on passes, you have no conviction, no decision making. I've never seen him struggle like this. And there's so many areas of his game, Scott, where it's like, you're not wrong. Maybe he scores a goal and everything clicks, but because every facet of his game is off, it's just, I don't know if one moment can rectify it. Everything has to be better. Literally everything. Just about.
Yeah, and that's where I just think like the hope would be that if it's a confidence thing, then lack of confidence affects every part of your game. Finding some way to get confidence back could bring just about everything back. Like, it could be that simple. I think the Bruins and McAvoy have to hope it's that simple, right? Because obviously if it is more that all this stuff is falling apart like almost individually, then that's a lot harder to fix and put that full puzzle back together. But I do think like if you can just find a way to get some confidence back with, a great period or a strong game or one great play, like I feel like that gets something accomplished, right? Pastrnak scoring that Game 7 overtime winner, like you could just feel a monkey off his back. You heard it in behind the B in the locker room after the game where he gets the game puck and he thanks his teammates for lifting him up. He says, "Guys, I know I was fighting it all series." Like guys know that, and it can be as simple as like that one play that just pulls them back in. I think McAvoy has still brought some physicality. Like he had another big hit last night, so like that has still been there, and maybe that could help bring him back, right? Like maybe he lands a big hit that helps him start to feel better again. But something has to happen. Like it can't. Right now, it feels like it all just keeps snowballing and piling up on him.
Yeah, and I mean, Game 3 is the perfect time to lay a huge check because obviously the animosity rose in Game 2. There's definitely guys out there that people want to see a little bit of revenge on. I mean, Brendan Montour was being a total dick. And he's a UMass guy, and normally I'm all for UMass guys, but when he scored and screamed in Marchand's face. And at this point, it's already 6-1. It's like, okay. And he was one of the people I don't think who ended up with a game misconduct, but he starts that with Marchand, pretends to lick him. It's like, that's the kind of stuff that you probably maybe respond to in game 3, and the Tkachuk stuff, getting a few extra punches in on Pastrnak when he was down, and the refs also holding Pastrnak down so he can't really defend himself. And like, there's definitely some things that happened in game 2 that are not going to just be put in the back of everyone's mind that the Bruins are going to want to come back out and respond to. And whether that be with scoring or a big hit or more fights, who knows? But McAvoy, if he's part of some of that, it could hopefully get him to look more like himself.
Yeah, and look, he's an amazing player, and it's why it's baffling that he's struggling the way that he is for as long as he has. I got to be honest, guys. It's not just this playoff run. He hasn't really been a huge game breaker the last 2 or 3 playoff runs for the Bruins, and all of them kind of ending in the first round. So I don't know. I just feel like he obviously has another level to his game. I just don't. I don't think he hasn't been excelling in the postseason the last 2-3 seasons, I would say. And I think that's fair to say. So I don't know what it is this time of year. Maybe he plays a lot of minutes in the regular season, but all the top guys do. So he has to be better ultimately. And if the Bruins want to move on beyond this Florida team, which, guys, that's another thing that was noticeable last night, which we knew going into the series, but the margin of error for the Bruins is a lot slimmer than it is for Florida based on some of Florida's sheer talent, right? I mean, some of those goals last night, I know the game's out of hand, but that snapshot by Barkov, I mean, there's really not anybody in the Bruins besides probably Pastrnak that can pull off that type of shot. There's just a little bit more finishing touch in Florida where they can probably get away with an off game easier than the Bruins probably can. So when the margin for error is smaller, your top players just have to come through. And I think if the Bruins want any sniff of winning the series, McAvoy has to be better. He just has to be. And I expect him to be, hopefully, but it's not going to be easy to get out of it.
Yeah,
there was a few chances in the first period that should have been in the back of the net, by the way. Like, the Bruins were dominating the first period. Beecher misses an open net. Marchand misses an open net. Coyle hits a post. And if those go in, it probably never gets out of hand. We probably don't see all those fights. It could have been like a Bruins 3-1 win rather than a 6-1 win the other way, because that could have kept the Bruins energy a little bit higher. My question is, are you guys concerned that their play really started to fall off in the second, and that it showed the fatigue that people were wondering when or if it was going to show up?
Well, but before I answer that, I do think the Panthers' margin of error is pretty small too. I mean, you saw, game 1, they were the team that made a couple uncharacteristic mistakes, and that ends up going 5-1 the other way. So, I think these are 2 really close teams. And, but both games have turned into blowouts, but I think that's because one team made the mistakes that the other didn't. Like, we haven't seen the clean game yet where both teams, where neither team really makes many mistakes, and it's, that 1-0, 2-1 game. Like, I think we're probably going to see that at some point. Bridget, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, well, I'll take the third period out of it because I think Brian called that a circus earlier. Like, that's exactly what it was. But the second period was concerning. It was bad. It was just an awful period. They got hardly any chances, got badly outpossessed. Obviously, Florida scores 3 times. So maybe that's, to some extent, fatigue finally catching up to them. They've been going every other day for a little while now. Montgomery said he didn't think they had juice. It's also the push you had to expect from the Panthers, right? Yeah. They're down 1-0 in the series, and they're down 1-0 after the first period. You knew that blitz was coming from them at some point. and Bruins weren't able to hold up against it. So, now it's their turn to respond, right? They responded with the fighting and scrumming and all that in the third period, but in terms of actual hockey, now it's their turn to respond in game 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think last night was one of those cases where, like I said, off the hop, the reason that they lost the game, because the game ended after the 40 minutes. The reason they lost those first 40 minutes was because of poor puck management and self-inflicted wounds, right? That's correctable, but that also happens to every team in every playoff series, like for the most part. So when you have two teams going head to head, two good teams that are, I know I said Florida has probably more leash if they play poorly than the Bruins do. I still stand by that to an extent, but they are very, very close, top to bottom, just the way as far as the product of their team. And you're gonna have that. You're gonna. I mean, Florida, like this, like we said, they lost game 1 5-1. There's a reason why in the postseason, the team that loses a game is usually the better team the following game, because it's easier when you lose. It's easier to watch film and correct what you did wrong and implement a better game plan. When you win and you watch film, you're like, okay, well, we won because they had poor execution here. We took advantage of this and we did this well, but we also don't know what they're going to combat us with in the next game. So it's when you come off of a win, it's probably tougher to game plan because you don't want to really change things, right? So there's a reason why you have ebbs and flows in a playoff series.
Well, and if you do change things, like Jim Montgomery has done after a couple of wins, you get criticized for it. So,
Right.
There's also that element of, even if you see things you want to change, you might not, because, geez, are we really going to change that after a win? So, you're right. It's so much easier to make changes after a loss and force the other team to adjust.
Like I don't watch game 1 and say to myself, "Oh wow, Bruins going to win this series in 5 or 6." And I don't say that, and I don't watch game 2 and then after the game be like, "Oh, here come the Panthers. They're awake. They're not rusty." Like, no, it's gonna be a long series. Like, yes, here they come, but we expected that. Like this is gonna be a long series, I believe, and so it's kind of playing out. I didn't expect 2 blowouts, but game 3 is a completely different game, and I would be saying that if the Bruins were up 2-0 in the series, like game to game, it's different. So just throw it out. But what I can say is, again, that's why. I don't know if you carry momentum game to game, and coaches will say the same thing in the NHL. But what I can say is the vibe in that Bruins room, losing 6-1, but going out swinging. And by the way, it wasn't just Pastrnak and Tkachuk getting into a fight, at a goal mount scramble. No. This was a center ice glove drop, premeditated glove drop with chirping going on before it, and like it was premeditated. So the Bruins lose this game 6-1, but I'm telling you, the feeling in that room is more bound together, I think. And okay, Pasta did that, but as Scott mentioned, after 100 minutes of penalty minutes already, like you're losing 6-1. He does not have to do that. And Bridget, to your point earlier, like other stars wouldn't. I bet you there's a lot of people in Toronto that would kill for one of their best 11 players, making 11 million to do that.
Go ahead, go at him.
So if you're gonna lose, like losing 6-1, it sucks. But I think the feeling in that room is better than if they just lost 6-1 without having that fight at the end, those fights at the end. So
yeah, because guess what the questions were about after the loss? It wasn't like, there was of course questions about fatigue and different things, but a lot of it was, about the scrums, about the fight. Everybody wanted to ask Pasta, did you go ask Jim Montgomery if you could fight? And then Pasta's quote coming out of it that is probably the best quote coming out of the locker room after that game was, "I'm not afraid of him, to be honest," which is a crazy thing to say about Tkachuk, because I think in reality, I think a lot of people would not want to drop the gloves with Tkachuk.
He's no Brady Tkachuk though. If you go back, if you watch Matthew Tkachuk's fight highlights in his career, first of all, there's not as many as people might think, and it's usually him kind of getting his bell rung by Zach Cassian, and kudos to him for doing it. But he's not really like somebody who fights his quote unquote weight class or higher.
No,
he has turned down a lot of fights in his career.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a reason he asked Pasta to go and not Frederick.
And I think there's a reason that happens after
Maroon's
Maroon's already got a 10-minute misconduct and is sitting in the locker room.
Yes. But still, everybody knows that crazy gives you an edge in a fight, and he certainly had the crazy edge on Pasta too. And Pasta,
I'll give Pasta credit. Like Pasta came up with some wild swings that
and
they
knocked
were.
himself over.
Yeah, I was gonna say like it was clearly kind of like the untrained animal who doesn't really know what he's doing, but like at least he was going for it, right? Like he wasn't just looking for a tie up to
he initiated.
Right.
Yeah, he said to coach, he didn't say, "Can I fight?" He said, "Can I go back out there?"
Yeah.
And coach said, okay.
Well, I think he I know he said like he just told me he was going back out. I think he did say something about Tkachuk because you could see Montgomery's reaction where it was almost like, Tkachuk, okay. Like,
yeah. He said, "Do you want to fight him?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Go for it." But yeah, like Pasta hops over the boards and he drops his gloves immediately and squares up, and Tkachuk's a little bit later to do so. I mean, they were both dropping the gloves, but what I'm saying is Pasta was ready for it. He had the initiative with the first couple swings, and Tkachuk's shots that landed didn't land until Tkachuk didn't get any punches until Pastrnak was already down and the refs were in between, really. So it's not like Tkachuk knocked him to the ice with a punch. It was just kind of like a jersey twist and off balance swings that kind of brought Pasta down.
Yeah, and then he can't defend himself because he's getting held down by two refs and he's getting punched over the back by Tkachuk, who is not stopping, even though obviously the etiquette is to not do that, not be a dick.
By the way, also not the first time Matthew Tkachuk's done that. Like he's been criticized for that before too, for throwing punches when a fight was already over. So he he has that in him. Like for everyone who wants to celebrate the way he plays, he also takes his cheap shots.
And the Bruins take notice of that.
Yeah.
Now it will be enough to win a series. Who knows?
Pastrnak turned around and jumped right back on him.
Yeah.
Obviously in response to that, because but again, like I like that. Like he's it's Pastrnak being like, one, like we're not taking your crap in the game, so yeah, I'll fight you. And then two, I'm not going to take your crap throwing punches when I'm already down. Like I'm going to jump back on top of you. So it could have been, like I mentioned, like going for a tie up. Like it could have been kind of a lame fight, but it turned into one where those guys were really going at each other. Like there seemed to be some real hatred kind of baked into that.
And you want to know what it showed that it was a point that you made, Scott, that Montgomery, when it came to calling out Pasta, like, put blame on your best players when it's on them, but also in this situation, you need your good players to kind of make an impact on the game. And at this point in time, it was impossible to do it by winning. And, so Pastrnak decides that this is how he can affect the game, and he's being a good teammate, I think. I think he's trying to give them life in the next game, right? Not necessarily going to help pull out a win in that one, but I don't understand when I'm seeing people saying things bad about Pastrnak. Like, obviously he knew it was probably going to go south for him. He did it anyway. I don't understand the negative stuff I've seen about Pasta fighting, and not a lot of it was like, oh, that's dumb because he could get hurt. No, a lot of it was like, oh, the stupid European guy thought he could fight. It's like, no, he knew that's what was going to happen.
Who's saying that? Somebody on Twitter with a Florida Panther?
Yeah, I was gonna say
bio picture.
I've fortunately avoided that. So.
I mean, all of the all the people commenting on like ESPN's post or Sportsnet or where it's like a neutral audience of like people around the just fans of the game and not necessarily fans of Boston. I was seeing him getting nothing but respect, and in fact, I was seeing hate going the other way towards Tkachuk for, of course, like we talked about, going with Pasta instead of somebody else, and after people left. So and the cheap shots, like again, when you have two guys square up at center ice and drop the gloves, it's a ton of respect. There should be a ton of respect, but when both guys go to the ice, that's where it is supposed to end. That's the code, right? And when Tkachuk decides to take liberties afterwards, not only on anybody but a top scorer in the world, Frederick and Maroon are watching that fight in the locker room on whatever big screen TV that they have. So the Bruins not only took notice of what Pastrnak did to step up in that moment, a game that he had no reason fighting other than the reason that he did, which was to spark his team. They took note of that. One of the best goal scorers in the world fighting at center ice. And then they also additionally took notice to the extra shots afterwards, which Tkachuk had clean shots at him because Pasta was being tied down a bit. So look, it's going to piss the Bruins off. It's going to hopefully bound them together, and hopefully they can rally behind that losing effort going out the way that they did. Will it be enough for them to win the series? No, you can't win a series on emotion alone, right? You have to execute. You have to keep your temperament in check when
healthy.
appropriate. Have to be healthy. But I will say this, though. There are a couple of duds at home in the Toronto series. By the way, Sheldon Keefe fired since we started recording. But game 2 against Toronto and game 5 against Toronto was kind of lifeless efforts from the Bruins. I don't see a lifeless effort at home in game 3 against Florida. I think the emotion and the intensity in the series is going to be pretty high all the way through to game 7 if it goes that far.
Well, I don't think that they have the ability to like have a night where they just like they spent all their emotion in game 2 and they don't come out with anything in game 3, because from puck drop, usually Tkachuk or someone drags you into it, right? Like you get dragged into the fight, whether you didn't have you had the energy to start with or not, because that's just the way that Florida plays, and it brings up that emotion level. Like first play of the game, Tkachuk draws a penalty because he goes and he tries to cheap shot Swayman, and then Marchand retaliates, and that was in the first minute of the game. That's probably what you see again pretty much every game of this series, to be honest with you. I think that, like I said earlier, this is going to be what the games look like rather than game 1, though the Bruins would probably rather see Florida not really come out the way that they did in game 2 rather than game 1. But one last thought about Pasta that I wanted to say was when something to start the series, I said that they can't get bullied, right? Like that's one thing that Florida does really well, is they kind of bully teams and they make them they put them back on their heels and they get them out of their game and they frustrate them. Well, Pasta stood out there and said, I'm not going to let Tkachuk bully me. I'm not going to let them bully me. And when you have your superstar player go out there and say, I'm not rolling over to these guys, then you hope that that's a moment that everybody looks back on the rest of the series and say, he didn't need to do that. But he didn't give up and he didn't let them bully him. So just maybe a key moment to think back on and talk about it in the locker room or between games or on the bench or whatever, something you can look back on.
Well, yeah. And they needed to be, not just because you're getting bullied on the scoreboard or pushed around in scrums or whatever, but Bridget, you mentioned Montour yelling right in Marchand's face after a goal. And obviously Marchand took care of that himself. He responds right away and they both end up with 10-minute misconduct, which, by the way, that reminded me of the scene in Ricky Bobby where he's celebrating after a win and he just turns and yells, woo, right in the face of the guy standing next to him.
Yeah.
But that Tkachuk was also taunting Charlie Coyle after one of the goals. So that you can't let another team taunt you. That stuff you do have to respond to. That first penalty Tkachuk draws, Justin Brazeau fell right into his trap. Rookie mistake on that one. The first response was fine. He kind of gets Tkachuk in the headlock after the whistle. But then he goes back at him and rips his helmet off. And it's just that's an automatic penalty.
Well, that's after Tkachuk, gets a free shot at Carlo too. So again, the refs let those go, but then they call a penalty on Brazeau. I think it's I think it was similar to like a delay of game penalty where it's like if the ref sees it, he has to. Like, is that a penalty, ripping a bucket off?
Yeah,
So
it's automatic.
I think if he
Yeah.
didn't do that, they would have let him. But I don't even know if Brazeau knew that rule. I didn't even know that rule. So
Well, it's newer.
yeah,
Just like
But-
the same rule that you can't like pull your own helmet off before a fight.
Mm.
Like how guys used to just put everything on the ice and like
Yeah.
taking anyone's helmet off or your own helmet off is ever since they're trying to help with head injuries it's been in the books.
So two comments quickly. Number one, as annoying as the taunting is, right? Montour screaming in Marchand's face and Tkachuk going at Coyle with little, haha, type stuff after a goal when you're already up 5-1, and the reason that you're scoring is because the Bruins aren't really trying to go for hits. But whether or not those specific taunts are happening, one thing the Bruins had to have known going into this series that they would have to deal with is all the chirping that goes on that you don't see all series long. Florida has the biggest ace in their pocket all series long, which is last year, and they have that until the Bruins beat them in the series. So that's going to be something that it's an ace in the sleeve that the Panthers have all series long. They can always sit there and point to last year, and the Panthers know last year doesn't matter right now, but they know it's still a fresh wound for the Bruins, and they're pouring salt in it. So that's something that the Bruins and look, that's why the Bruins are annoyed at Florida. It's one of the reasons, right? So Florida knows that. And Montour doing that big woo in Marchand's face, he's not doing that if the Bruins won Game 7 last year, but the Panthers did. So there's this element of the Florida Panthers just kind of, poking that. And, they can get away with it because they earned that right after winning last year. And until the Bruins do something this year about it, then they have that edge. And as far as bullies go, all this has happened so far without the Panthers having their biggest bully in the lineup, arguably, which is Sam Bennett. He is somebody who would love to be in these moments the last couple of games, and makes you wonder, again, from a hockey perspective, you have to think this is exactly the moments in the playoff series the Bruins tried to bring in Lucic for in the offseason. And obviously, he is no longer with the team and for off-ice reasons, but for on-ice reasons, this is kind of why they went out and got him. And even though you brought in Patrick Maroon, Maroon's not the fighter Lucic is. So I'm sure they miss having that true tough guy that can kind of set the tone or stand up for players. But they have enough toughness for this series. I'm just saying that's probably something that might be annoying from a hockey perspective. We had the guy, and now we don't because of bullshit reasons. Not bullshit reasons on his part, not what I mean. But
like Sweeney's probably thinking to himself, like in the start of the season, we heard him say what he was targeting in the offseason was more grit. And then at the trade deadline, same thing with Maroon. I really don't understand what the hell happened with Maroon. He got ejected during a TV timeout.
Stupid.
So like his misconduct seems like it was wasted. Like it could have been used up on an actual fight or something. Like, maybe he'll be more. I don't know. It feels like he maybe just said something they heard him.
Yeah, I was gonna say it feels like maybe there's some magic words involved there, but they never showed like fully what led up to it.
Anything. I was getting so pissed.
Yeah, because like obviously Nick Cousins did something before that. So I haven't gone back and rewatched the entire game yet. So maybe when I do, I'll see it. But like he obviously did something because Maroon makes a point to go right over to him and say something and kind of give him like a little whack, and Cousins ended up with a 10-minute misconduct out of that too. So that was sort of the start of like the refs clearly weren't just weren't going to put up with anything. But yeah, as we sit here recording Thursday morning, I don't know exactly what set that off. And yes, it would have been really nice had ESPN managed to show it, but oh well.
Their broadcast, by the way, the camera work is rough. It's rough. An example is the play will still be going on, and there'll be a player they're talking about, and the player will get off the ice and go onto the bench and like to end their shift. And the camera will just follow the player onto the bench while the play's still going on. I know there was a big blunder about switching over from the Rangers Hurricanes game with a minute left in a tied game and going to the Dallas Colorado game. And that's a specific mistake, but the actual camera work has been just brutal to
The
follow.
beginning of the Tkachuk-Pastrnak fight, they didn't show until they were both on the ground. And then they finally showed it on the replay. They don't show a lot of replays. I was kind of losing my mind as like someone who does broadcast. Like I'm used to something very different than what they were doing. Because my producer will always come in my ear like, okay, you go to the most recent replay first. And there was camera angles that I hated. Once again, the behind the net camera angle, don't like that. Maybe use it on a replay. Still don't really care for it then. But yeah, they weren't showing. It was like tight, and then it would back up, and then it would. Yeah, I don't know. It was bothering me.
I hate how frequently they use the player tags too. Like certain situations where you're talking about a player, like I get it, you're highlighting him in real time. But they use it so often, and there's times that the tag
it's distracting.
Covers up the puck, or goes over into like a player next to the guy, and it's like, all right, like got it. Like you don't need it all the time, especially not when it's like a congested offensive zone situation.
I don't like it because I'm the play-by-play broadcaster. It's my job to tell you who has the puck, not the little logos job. Like in my mind, it's like, I don't know. It's coming after my job.
Guys, just to kind of get back to some of the X's and O's of this series, another area that hasn't really bitten the Bruins too bad yet, but again, when you have such an emotional series, you're going to have these officials trying to, put their stamp on a game, flex their muscle, flex their authority, set standards, call some penalties, whatnot. So the Bruins are going to be very tempted to be baited. And through the first two games of the series, I feel like while the Bruins, first of all, dating back to the Toronto series, the Bruins need to improve at drawing penalties because they're not getting nearly enough per game. And I don't want to sit here and say it's because of the officials. It could be the Bruins just aren't. Maybe they have to start flopping, or maybe they have to put themselves in positions where they can get a stick involved in them. I don't know.
Right. How about have the puck in the offensive zone?
Right. Yes. There you go.
That'd be a good way to start.
That's a good start. And another common theme when the Bruins struggle in these postseason games and dating back to the end of the regular season, you really know because the Bruins get no shots on net. I mean, again, I think they finished the game with like 15 shots last night. But
yeah, they had 6 in the first, 6 in the second, 3 in the third.
Right. So but what I was saying was the power play. Florida's power play hasn't really bitten Boston too much yet, but it looks dangerous. It looks very dangerous, and the Bruins power play has had a couple of chances, but not as consistently in the offensive zone. When the Panthers have a power play, it's about 2 minutes of zone time. When the Bruins have a power play, it's about 25 seconds, so maybe 30, and it's not really set up smoothly. So that's something that's going to have to improve, I think, because special teams, as we saw in the Toronto series, can be massive.
Yeah, I think the key is just evening up those number of chances. Now, the Bruins power play, I do wonder about, Montgomery now reuniting the old top unit, McAvoy, Pastrnak, Marchand all on the ice at the same time. I don't really feel like they've figured out the issues that were hurting them down the stretch in the second half. Like, it still kind of looks like the same old problems to me when they get out there. And McAvoy's individual struggles are part of that because he's passing up shots, he's hesitating. So like that's a big one. Now it's left you. So like now you're back to riding that unit for, a minute 20 instead of splitting, an even minute each way. The second unit gets on and it's kind of just, what's left of your top 9 forwards. And now it's Lohrei running it because Shattenkirk's out of the lineup. And, I feel like you're not getting much from that unit either. So I do wonder if maybe you go back to splitting up the units, but I don't know if that works the same way if with Lohrei running, the second unit instead of Shattenkirk, because I don't know if I'm really in a rush to get Shattenkirk back in the lineup, although I did think we haven't mentioned this yet. I thought Derek Forbort had a really tough game too. Even besides, whatever the miscommunication was in the goal, he was slow getting to the front anyways. But even outside of that, I thought he was, every time the puck was on his stick, I thought he was struggling, thought he was fighting it.
He did block a lot of shots early that seemed to be important at the time.
He did, especially on the penalty kill, and the Bruins continue to do a good job of that. And I also think on the penalty kill, they're doing a good job of taking. Now, Reinhart got one good chance in game 2 that I can recall. But for the most part, I think that's the play the Panthers want. They want Reinhart from the bumper. I think he led the NHL in power play goals or second.
He led.
Yeah. So that's obviously the play they want. I think the Bruins PK has done pretty good job for the most part, taking that away and forcing the Panthers to try to find a different play to beat you.
Yeah, and Shattenkirk didn't play the last 2 games of the regular season against the Panthers, and he didn't play the first 2 playoff games against the Panthers. So he has only played 2 of the 6 games this season. Obviously, there's a matchup there that they don't like. And to take Forbort out would probably help your offense a little bit, maybe help your breakouts, but hurt your penalty kill, which, like you're mentioning, that could be a really strong Florida power play that you might need him in there against. But on the upside of Shattenkirk could be your own power play. If you get enough power plays, he might be able to help there. But it almost feels like to me, they're still missing something there, even with Shattenkirk in rather than Lohrei, because it's not like Lohrei was terrible at it. It's not like Lohrei has no sense for offense or anything like that.
I mean, I've said it before, and they're just not going to do it. But I would have Shattenkirk on the top unit ahead of McAvoy. I just think he's better at running the power play. I know he's not as good of a player as McAvoy and all that, and I know you don't want to demote your $9.5 million defenseman, but I don't know. We're in game 3 of the second round of the playoffs. If Shattenkirk were in the lineup, and I don't know if he's gonna be. I'm not in a rush to do that, but I just think he's better running a power play right now than McAvoy is.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if the player is not appeasing the product, then you can't worry about appeasing the contract. You know what I mean? You have to play who's giving you the best chance in that moment or situation. And if that's Shattenkirk, tough shit to McAvoy's contract. Is it ideal? No, but it's who cares?
It's more of what it does to McAvoy's confidence, maybe.
Well, he needs. Well, you know what? It's. If he was doing a job, he wouldn't be in the situation, and this dates back to the regular season too. So, that's unfortunately, it's kind of tough shit, right? You can't feel bad for the player; he has to do it himself. But question to you guys, because also again, last game the Bruins did get a power play when the game was still in the balance. I think they were down a goal. I think it was 2-1, and this is after a couple of, whatever. It's 2-1 game, and Lohrei is out with the big guys. He was out on that power play with Marchand and Pastrnak and DeBrusk and maybe Zacha. So
it was Marchand, Pasta, Coyle, DeBrusk, Lohrei.
Okay, so there you go. Yeah. So
that's because I think that was right. I think McAvoy was dealing with the cut. He kept trying to come back, right. And his cut kept bleeding. He had to go back.
I originally thought that maybe it was punishment, but then I realized he was on the bench getting worked on.
Yeah. That's right. I forgot that's exactly when that occurred. Okay, so it was because he was out with stitches or getting glued up or something. Okay, fair enough. So next game, guys, I kind of feel like they're just waiting for Peak to come back in the lineup to put him right back with Wotherspoon. Do we know if Peak is going to be available for game 3? And what lineup changes would you consider if you're Jim Montgomery?
We don't know. Peak did travel with the team, so he was down in Florida. He's been skating. We know Don Sweeney, before this round started, said he anticipated Peak and Heinen both returning at some point during the series. Now, we don't know if some point means game 3 or game 6. But we're now through 2 games that those guys haven't played. So you would think that they're close, but we just don't know, I guess, until we actually see them out there or see them, go through a morning skate in like a regular lineup spot. But yeah, I would definitely put Peak in if and when he's cleared. I do feel like, this series suits him. He had a really good game against Florida the last time they played them in the regular season. And Brian, I'm glad you said Wotherspoon. I would put him with Wotherspoon. I fear that because Montgomery seems to really love Forbort more than a lot of people, that it would be Forbort peak and Wotherspoon would come out. I hope that's not what happens. I think Wotherspoon's playing better than Forbort right now, but either way, yeah, I do think I'm putting Peak back in.
Yeah, he comes in as soon as you can get him back in. Like you said, both him and Heinen took the trip to Florida. They seem like they're close, but we just don't know for sure what's going to happen in game 3. They could be game time decisions. Heinen seems like he's been at different points game time decision. One of the games against Toronto, he played when he was up in the air, and then obviously the next few games he hasn't. But maybe once they're healthy, they're somewhat more rested than some of the other guys, and that could help. Peak is kind of like a younger, quicker puck moving Forbort. So he brings some of those aspects, and I would put him with Wotherspoon rather than Forbort, just because that has been a proven pair that was working perfectly fine before Peak got hurt and before Forbort came back. So I'd like to see that. In terms of other moves to make, I don't know. Boquist and Brown were the changes that happened because Patrick Brown played game 1, Boquist played game 2. That comes back to whether or not you think Brown can help you physically.
He's been sent back down to Providence.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that.
It was I think it started. It was announced after we started recording. So
yeah, that's usually what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's not an option then. So the only the other person that's available then would be Lauko, and whether or not you want to put him in to try to handle some of the animosity and some of the gamesmanship, because he's okay at that. But in my mind, I wouldn't take Beecher out just for that. I don't know how you guys have thought he's played. I mean, he almost scored. Kind of stinks. It rolled on him in the first period there. He was on a 2-on-1 with Brazeau, and he couldn't put it in.
I like having Boquist and Beecher in. Like, I like what both of them can do at their speed, especially, if they're out there against Florida's fourth line or third pairing. Like, I think their speed can make some things happen, which is what you saw on that odd man rush that Beecher starts and leads to a great chance. And you'd love for him to bury that rebound with, seemingly an empty net. And it just kind of didn't get all of it. It ends up going wide. But we've seen that a few times from both of them this postseason, where they'll pick up a puck in the D zone and just straight up skate past guys because, lower lineup defensemen get caught flat-footed or whatever. So I'm keeping them in. I guess it's hard to say. Like, obviously the Bruins didn't generate enough offense in game 2, so it's tempting to want to do something. But I just don't know that I'm really forcing anyone in. Like, Heinen, once he's healthy, sure, I'm probably looking for a way to get him in. But I've said it before, like, I'm not putting him in if he's 75%, because I don't think he's a guy that you need to get back in at less than 100% over the guys who are in there. Like, I don't think it's enough of an upgrade to take that chance. And, I like what Brazeau's brought. I think Van Riemsdyk's played well for the most part. Again, you could point to everyone after game 2 and be like, they didn't bring enough. Like, that's the entire lineup. I mean, even the guys higher in the lineup, like Pastrnak, we love the fight. He had 0 shots on goal in the game. Like, So he kind of gets to cover that up because he had the big fight. But if it wasn't for that, like, I think there would be a lot more talk about how quiet of a game David Pastrnak had in game 2. So, the only guy who I think, like, I look at him like he seems like he's not really keeping up at times is Pat Maroon, but I'm not taking him out in this series because
Nope.
you can use his attitude and what he can bring in, into some of those scrums and kind of keeping guys in check.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think look, another area they have to improve at is this goes under the self-inflicted wounds category. Is too many men on the ice penalties.
I was thinking the exact same thing because that's one thing we haven't talked about yet. And they've taken 5. That's insane.
What is going on?
The entire rest of the NHL has taken 4 in the postseason.
Yeah, it just can't happen. It needs to end. They got to figure that shit out.
And it seems like what happens is, like, a defenseman or forward or whoever who comes out of the box, like, they go to jump on the bench and 2 different people step on for them. Like, if it's a defenseman, like, another defenseman will hop out plus the forward that was actually supposed to go out. And that just seems to be what keeps happening.
Right. It's specifically that situation that happened last night. And this hasn't been all of them. Some of them have just been bad changes, but a few of them have where Brendan Carlo is in the box. He exits the box. So now the Bruins have 3 defensemen, 2 forwards on the ice. So one of the defensemen has to change out for a forward. They do that. The forward jumps on.
Scotty.
But as Bridget said, Montgomery after the game.
Your face is frozen. I don't know if you can. So I'm gonna pick up where Scott left off. But yeah, it happens right after a penalty. So personnel isn't quite lined up. Like the normal lines and pairs are not what you want them out there. There's Scott.
Sorry, Scott. We couldn't hear anything you said the last 40 seconds. So Bridget just kind of moved on a little bit. Do you remember what you were saying?
Tried to pick up where you left off.
Great. I didn't know I got cut off, so I don't know exactly when that happened.
So I would say you were starting to talk about what Montgomery said about it.
Oh, yeah. So he said, ultimately it's on him. He said he's giving instructions on, giving instructions to guys of who's going on for who, but the players are then messing it up. And because they have now continued to mess it up over and over again, clearly it's on the communication. He said, obviously, however I'm communicating it isn't getting through, which I would say, yes, correct. Like, part of it is on the players, right? Like, everyone has to know who they're going on for. But when you're screwing it up this many times, the coaches have to figure out a different way to communicate. Like, and I don't know exactly what their system is, and I don't know what they changed to. But when it keeps happening, it's on the coaches. Because that means whatever you're trying to do, clearly in with the players.
Yeah. And I think it's also like someone sees Carlo coming and they just automatically think, oh, defenseman for defenseman. But then that puts you with 3 defensemen on the ice. And because you already had 2 out there because Carlo was in the box. So yeah, it always seems to be 3 defensemen and 3 forwards out there. And it's just, it ends up hurting you. 5 is crazy. 5 in what has it been, 9 games is nuts.
Yeah. Yep, and it can't happen. It cannot happen. So I think we're probably good on this recap, guys. We've looked ahead to game 3. We've recapped game 2. The next episode will drop this weekend. Friday night is game 3, so expect the latest episode to be on Saturday morning at some point. Bridget, Scott, any final takeaways or discussion points before we sign off here? Got about 4 or 5 minutes left at most.
No, I think we pretty much covered everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Coming back home to the Garden. So.
Yeah. Yeah, expect an emotional game, and again, there's a fine line, right? You can't go chasing Matthew Tkachuk, you can't go chasing the Panthers for revenge, because that's what they want. That is exactly what they want. So there's a fine line between playing tough, playing physical, taking the game to them, but you can't forget that what's going to win this series is execution and game plan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, now I'll be interested to see if the Bruins continue to stay in a hotel now that they're back home. You know, do
I
they
feel
carry
like they're
this
not
over
going
from?
to.
I think they are.
Really?
I mean, we'll see, but
That's
I
that's
mean,
a tough sell. That's a tough sell to Mrs. Carlo there, Scott.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, there's a few people that
he
aren't.
might be an exception. I think you can make a newborn baby exception.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I don't know. I mean,
Awesome.
teams have done this for full playoff runs before, so they might. One other thing I was going to bring up, because we do occasionally get asked about this, especially like if we put out a call for questions. Fabian Lysell has been cleared to play down in Providence, so that is encouraging. I know he had suffered an upper body injury, I think believed to be a shoulder, and there was concern that it might be season ending, but he is now back for Providence playoffs. So, hopefully that means it's not something that is going to need surgery or, interfere with his off season or anything. So that's encouraging.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, I think we should probably end there, guys. So thank you all for listening. Enjoy Game 3. We'll talk to you on Saturday. Hey, guys, thanks for watching this Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.